Why consciousness is immortal, not just as a comforting idea but as a philosophical necessity, is the central argument of this exploration. Consciousness, that irreducible core of experience, is not a byproduct of the brain or a fleeting accident of biology. It is the very foundation of reality itself. And because consciousness is not material, not spatial, and not bound by time in the way physical objects are, it cannot be extinguished by the death of the body. This is not a claim made from hope, nor a belief inherited from tradition. It is a proof, grounded in the nature of what it means to be aware. From the first-person perspective, the only perspective we ever truly inhabit, there is no coherent way to imagine non-existence. You cannot experience your own absence. You cannot witness your own annihilation. Consciousness, by its very nature, stands beyond the reach of death. Throughout history, philosophers, mystics, and scientists have struggled with the mystery of consciousness. Yet the most profound insight remains hidden in plain sight, that awareness is not something that can be broken down into smaller parts, nor explained away by chemical reactions. It is the field in which all experience appears. And because it is not a thing among other things, it cannot perish as things do. In the pages that follow, we will walk carefully through the logic, the metaphysics, and the human experience that points unerringly toward this conclusion. That while bodies may wither, while names may fade, the witnessing presence that you are, the raw fact of awareness, remains untouched. To understand this is not only to confront the mystery of death with new eyes, it is to realize that what you are has always belonged to something timeless, something deathless, something far greater than the passing forms of this world. Consciousness is immortal, and we are already living proof of it. Consciousness is where everything begins. Without it, there are no thoughts, no sensations, no dreams, no memories. Without consciousness, there is no world at all, at least not a world that could ever be known. And yet, for all its central importance, consciousness is the one thing modern science cannot explain. We can map the electrical activity of the brain, we can describe neurons firing and chemicals exchanging, but none of this explains the simple, astonishing fact that you are aware. No scan, no measurement, no experiment has ever bridged the gap between physical processes and subjective experience, between what happens in the brain and what it feels like to be you. This is known as the hard problem of consciousness, a term made famous by philosopher David Chalmers. The hard problem asks, how does the firing of neurons, the shifting of molecules, create the vivid world of color, sound, pain, love, memory, and imagination? How can physical matter, which has no experience, no thoughts, no sensations, suddenly give rise to the rich inner life you and I know so intimately? The truth is, no one knows. And deeper still, perhaps no purely physical explanation is even possible. The problem is not just that we don't yet have the right answers. It's that we may be asking the wrong questions. We are used to thinking of consciousness as something that the brain produces, the way a factory produces goods, or a car engine produces movement. But what if that idea is backwards? What if consciousness is not something the brain produces, but something the brain tunes into, like a radio picking up a signal already in the air? This idea is not new. Thinkers like Henry Bergson and Aldous Huxley suggested that the brain might not be a generator of consciousness, but a filter, narrowing a vast and timeless field of awareness down into a manageable stream that allows us to survive and function in this world. According to this view, the brain acts less like a creator and more like a reducing valve, cutting down the infinite into something small enough for everyday life. And if that is true, if consciousness is not an emergent property of matter, but something fundamental, something woven into the fabric of reality itself, then death of the body would not mean death of consciousness. It would mean the end of the filtering process. It would mean a release back into something wider, deeper, more expansive than anything we can experience while tethered to the physical form. Even without stepping into speculation, the very structure of experience points to this deeper truth. Consciousness is not made up of parts. It cannot be broken down into smaller pieces. It has no shape, no size, no color, no weight. It is not located anywhere in space. You cannot find it by cutting open the brain. You cannot isolate it like a chemical or measure it like a force. Consciousness simply is, immediate, undeniable, the invisible stage on which all thoughts, sensations, and perceptions appear. Phenomenologists like Edmund Husserl and Martin Heidegger spoke about this mystery in their own way. They pointed out that all our knowledge of the world is structured by experience. We cannot get behind experience to some raw, objective reality. We always meet the world through the lens of consciousness. In this sense, consciousness is not just one thing among many. It is the precondition for everything. It is the light by which anything is seen, the ground upon which anything is known. And because consciousness is the condition for the appearance of anything, it cannot itself be an appearance. It cannot be something that merely happens, or something that simply arises from complexity. It is prior to all such things. It is, in a very real sense, the closest thing we know to the eternal. When you close your eyes and listen to the flow of your own thoughts, or simply rest in the feeling of being alive, you are touching something deeper than time, deeper than space, deeper than the body that carries you. You are touching the mystery that philosophers, mystics, and sages across all cultures and ages have recognized as the true heart of reality. Consciousness is not a product, it is a presence. And because it is a presence beyond matter, beyond form, beyond fragmentation, it bears the unmistakable mark of something that death cannot touch. It is here that the first thread of the proof begins. Not by leaping to grand conclusions, but by paying close attention to the undeniable fact that awareness, this silent, witnessing presence you call I, is of a different order than the world of changing things. It is not an object. It is not a thing among things. It is the space in which things appear. And because it is not constructed, it cannot be destroyed. Because it is not made, it cannot be unmade. Because it is not in time, it cannot be lost in time. It simply is. And it is this simple living fact that forms the first foundation of the philosophical proof of life beyond death. If consciousness is not something that matter simply produces, then what happens when the body dies? The materialist answer seems simple. When the brain stops functioning, consciousness ends. Lights out. Nothing more. But when we look closer, this explanation starts to fall apart. Materialism rests on the assumption that everything about the mind can be reduced to physical processes, neurons firing, chemicals flowing, circuits activating. But despite decades of research, no one has explained how physical matter alone could give rise to subjective experience. How do atoms, arranged one way, create the taste of coffee, the sound of music, the ache of love? There is a deep and stubborn mystery here, one that materialism cannot explain away. The gap between physical processes and conscious experience is not a small gap. It is a canyon, vast, silent, and unbridgeable by anything we have found so far. Philosophers call this the explanatory gap. And it's not just a technical problem to be solved with more experiments. It's a fundamental mismatch between the tools of material science and the reality of consciousness itself. You can know every fact about how a brain works and still not explain why there is a someone inside experiencing it. This failure of materialism matters because it weakens the central claim that death, the end of brain function, must mean the end of consciousness. If you cannot explain how consciousness arises from matter in the first place, you cannot confidently claim that it disappears when matter breaks down. The truth is, no one has ever proven that consciousness depends entirely on the brain. We know that changes in the brain affect consciousness, trauma, chemicals, disease, but correlation is not causation. Damaging a television set affects the picture and sound, but it doesn't prove that the broadcast originates inside the television. The signal was always there. The device simply received and shaped it. Aldous Huxley once suggested that the brain might act like a reducing valve, filtering an overwhelming sea of consciousness down into a trickle that we can handle. When the body dies, the valve falls away. What was limited becomes unlimited. What was filtered becomes full. The analogy is imperfect, but it points to something profound. The relationship between body and mind may not be creation and dependence, but mediation and limitation. Death may not annihilate consciousness, it may release it. Even if we stay firmly grounded in reason, the materialist view reveals its weakness. It demands that we believe that the most intimate, undeniable fact of our existence, our awareness, is somehow an accident of physics, vanishing utterly when a few pounds of tissue decay. Yet no one can explain how that awareness ever appeared to begin with. This is not science, it is faith, a faith in the completeness of a theory that has already shown its limits. And so we find ourselves at a turning point. If consciousness cannot be fully explained by physical matter, then its relationship to death is not so simple. If awareness is more fundamental, more original than brain chemistry, then death might change the mode of experience, but not the fact of experience itself. Death may end the body. It may end the mind's habits, memories and forms, but it need not, and logically cannot, end the silent witness behind all those things. The philosopher's task is not to believe what is fashionable, but to follow the truth wherever it leads. And here, reason itself points us toward a deeper, older intuition. That the death of the body is not the death of the soul. That what we are, at our core, is not subject to the same dissolution as the body that carries us. The fear of death is rooted in the fear of annihilation, the terror that all awareness, all memory, all meaning will be swallowed into a black and endless void. But when we look closely, when we examine what consciousness actually is, we find something astonishing. The void we fear cannot be experienced. And if it cannot be experienced, it cannot be real for the conscious self. Death, then, is not what we thought it was. It is not a fall into nothingness. It is a change, a passage, a transition in the endless journey of awareness itself. At the center of every experience you have ever had, there is a simple, silent fact. You are aware. Before thoughts arise, before emotions stir, before perceptions flood in through the senses, there is already awareness. The pure, undeniable experience of being here now. This I, this witnessing presence, is so constant, so intimate, that we rarely notice it at all. It is the background of every moment, the silent stage on which the drama of life unfolds, and yet it holds the key to the greatest mystery of all. Descartes, centuries ago, captured this insight with his famous statement, "Cogito, ergo sum." I think, therefore I am. But thinking is only one small activity within a much larger truth. Even before you think, you are aware. Even without words, without concepts, without memories, there is the sheer, vivid presence of being. You can doubt your memories. You can doubt your senses. You can doubt every belief you hold about the world, but you cannot doubt the raw fact that you are doubting, that awareness is happening. This realization is more than clever philosophy. It is the foundation of what you are. It is the one thing that no skepticism, no argument, no change can erase. And here is the deeper point. Because consciousness is the condition for any experience, and even the experience of doubt, even the experience of fear, it cannot contain within itself the experience of its own absence. Think about it carefully. You can imagine a world without you in it. You can picture your body lying still, your name forgotten, your story ending, but you cannot, in any meaningful sense, imagine being not there to witness it. You cannot step outside awareness to experience non-awareness. The mind can play with images of darkness, of silence, of void. But even these images require a witness, a presence to perceive them. The eye cannot see its own blindness. The ear cannot hear its own deafness. The self cannot experience its own non-being. This is not a trick of language, it is a fact of experience. And it leads to a startling, unavoidable conclusion. Non-existence, true, absolute non-being, is something you can never encounter. Not before birth, not after death. Not even in the deepest sleep, where awareness may fade, but being itself persists. When you fall into dreamless sleep, there is no memory, no sensation. But when you wake, you say, "I was asleep." Something remained, some continuity of existence, even if unmarked by thought. The thread of being was never broken. And so it is with death. Not because of wishful thinking, but because of the nature of self-awareness itself. You cannot step outside of being. You cannot fall into a nothingness that consciousness could never register, never know, never endure. Death may change the form of experience. It may strip away the body, the personality, the story you have woven about yourself. But it cannot erase the primal fact of awareness, because without awareness, there is no erasure, no loss, no experience of any kind. You do not witness your beginning. You will not witness your end. You are the witnessing itself. The philosophers who have truly sat with this truth, from Descartes to Kant, from Vedanta masters to mystics across time, have all reached a similar understanding. Being is not something that happens to you. It is what you are. And because it is what you are, it cannot be undone by the death of a structure, by the collapse of a system, by the ending of a physical body. The mind fears death because it fears losing its forms, just so, its memories, its pleasures, its familiar patterns. But consciousness itself does not fear. It simply endures, endlessly flowing from one form to another, from one experience to another, beyond the narrow frames of time and space. When the body falls away, when the story ends, what remains is not a blank silence. What remains is the same silent witness that was there before the first memory, before the first word, before the first step into this world. You. Not the name, not the face, not the history. You, the timeless presence behind it all. And so the proof deepens. Not through speculation, but through the direct, inescapable structure of awareness itself. Not through faith, but through reason. Not through hope, but through the living reality that even now, even as you hear these words, is quietly shining within you. The body lives in space. It moves through time. It is born, it grows, it changes, and it dies. The body is a form, a magnificent, mysterious form. But it is still part of the material world, bound by the laws of motion, gravity, decay. But consciousness is not like this. It is not a thing among things. It does not occupy a point in space. It does not age through time in the way the body does. It witnesses change, but it does not itself change in the same way. You can close your eyes right now and remember a moment from childhood. In that memory, perhaps you see a room, a face, a feeling. The body in that memory was smaller, younger, different. The thoughts were different, the emotions sharper or simpler. But the awareness, the sense of being there, is the same. The witness has not aged. It has not changed. It has not moved through space. It has simply watched. This is not poetry. It is the structure of experience itself. Space and time are part of what you see, part of what you experience, but they are not what you are. You move through time in the same way you move through a landscape, but the one who moves is not defined by the road beneath the feet. The philosopher Immanuel Kant recognized that space and time are not absolute realities out there. They are ways our mind structures experience. They are like lenses through which we see the world, necessary for perception, but not ultimate in themselves. If space and time are forms of appearance, and consciousness is what experiences appearance, then consciousness is not itself in space and time. It holds space and time, it weaves them into meaning, but it is not trapped inside them. This insight changes everything when we think about death. The things that die, the body, the mind's contents, the shifting events of the personal story will all belong to the realm of space and time. They have location, they have duration, they are born, they grow, they decline. But consciousness, being non-spatial and non-temporal in its essence, is not subject to the same laws. It cannot be broken apart in space because it does not occupy space. It cannot be measured in time because it does not age in time. Death affects forms. It affects the configuration of matter, the structure of personality, the physical organism that allows us to function in this particular world. But death does not and cannot touch the silent, formless witness that underlies all experience. The passing of the body is a change of scene, not the end of the play. It is a shift in what is seen, not a destruction of the seeing itself. Think of it like this. The riverbank collapses, the water flows on, the window shatters. The light streams through without obstruction. Space and time belong to the appearances of the world. Consciousness belongs to what allows those appearances to appear at all. And because it is prior to space, prior to time, it stands outside the reach of death. It is not immortal in the sense of being an object that persists forever. It is immortal in the sense that it was never truly subject to mortality at all. It is not a thing that survives. It is the field in which survival and death themselves arise and pass away. This is not something we have to believe. It is something we can notice, right here, right now, in the simple, unchanging fact of being aware. You are aware of the passing of time, but awareness itself does not pass. You are aware of the movement through space, but awareness itself does not move. You are aware of the rise and fall of forms, but the awareness that sees them is silent, unbroken, untouched. In this way, consciousness reveals itself as something deeper, vaster, and more enduring than anything the physical world can offer. And this is why death, the end of the body's journey through space and time, cannot and does not erase the fundamental fact of being. It changes the scenery, yes. It changes the story. But it does not change the silent, endless presence that has always been there, watching, witnessing, simply being. Across the long corridors of history, the greatest minds and traditions have pointed again and again to the same hidden truth. Consciousness does not perish with the body. They came from different lands, spoke different languages, used different symbols. Yet what they saw at the heart of reality was strikingly similar. Plato, writing more than 2,000 years ago, taught that the soul pre-exists the body and survives beyond it. In his dialogue Phaedo, Plato describes the soul as something woven from a different fabric than the physical world, a reality more lasting and more real than the fleeting shadows we see around us. The body is a temporary home. The soul is the traveler, destined to return to a higher realm once the journey here is complete. Plato did not arrive at this conclusion through blind faith. He reasoned that if the soul carries knowledge that is not learned in this life, if it recognizes truths that the senses have never taught, then it must have existed before birth. And if it existed before, then it does not vanish at death. The ancient Indian sages of the Vedanta tradition reached a similar insight, though by a different path. In the Upanishads, sacred texts whispered across thousands of years, we find the declaration, "The self is unborn, eternal, imperishable. It does not die when the body dies." Here the Atman, the true self, is not the mind, not the personality, not the changing contents of thought. It is pure awareness, identical with Brahman, the ultimate reality behind all appearances. It was never born. It never dies. It simply is. Vast, silent, infinite. Plotinus, the great Neoplatonist philosopher, taught that every soul emanates from the One, a source beyond time and space. For Plotinus, the physical world is only a dim reflection of a higher, timeless reality. The soul's journey through life and death is a return to that unity, shedding the illusions of separateness to remember its true home. Even in the rationalist traditions of Europe, echoes of this understanding remain. Leibniz, the philosopher and mathematician, proposed that reality is made up of monads, simple, indivisible centers of experience. Monads do not perish. They unfold according to their own inner laws, reflecting the universe from their unique perspectives. Though the language differs, soul, Atman, monad, spirit, the essential insight remains the same. Consciousness, in its deepest reality, is not a passing event in time. It is the fundamental ground from which time and space themselves arise. And this was not merely a belief for comfort, it was a rational, experiential realization. It was born from the deepest reflection on the nature of being, a reflection that transcended culture, geography, and era. It is tempting in our modern world to dismiss these traditions as outdated, irrelevant, the relics of a less scientific age. But when we do so, we miss the fact that these teachings were not based on ignorance of death. They were born from a profound encounter with it. These philosophers and sages lived in a world where death was visible, immediate, unhidden. They faced it not with denial, but with deep inquiry. And what they found over and over again was that the death of the body is not the death of the self. The traditions differ in how they describe what follows: reincarnation, union with the divine, continued journeying. But on the essential point, they agree the core of who you are, the pure witness, the silent knower, is not extinguished by death. It is not wishful thinking. It is not an escape from fear. It is a recognition, born from the most serious and sober inquiry into what it means to exist at all. And when we strip away the symbols, the myths, the cultural trappings, what remains is an insight that is startlingly clear. The awareness you call I does not belong to the world of decay. It belongs to something deeper, something beyond the reach of time. It belongs to the eternal. There is a quiet continuity in being that most of us overlook. It weaves through every experience, every change, every transition, steady, constant, unbroken. Before you were born, you do not remember. After you die, you may not remember. But memory is not the measure of being. Memory comes and goes. Awareness, being itself, remains. Think of sleep. Each night you slip into dreamless sleep, a state where there are no thoughts, no perceptions, no memories being formed. From the outside, it seems like consciousness has disappeared. And yet, when you awaken, you do not say, "I was annihilated." You say, "I was asleep." Something continuous, something silent and aware, bridges the gap between the last thought before sleep and the first thought upon waking. That same continuity is what carries you through every transition. From childhood to adulthood, from moment to moment, from dream to waking. You change, your body changes, your thoughts change. But the fact of being, the sense of being here, being now, never flickers, never breaks. The philosopher Schopenhauer once pointed to this mystery when he said that death and birth are not absolute beginnings or endings, but merely changes in the form of appearance. The will to live, the fundamental striving of existence, does not cease with death. It changes its expression. The continuity of being is not dependent on form. It is not dependent on memory. It is deeper than any content of experience. It is the simple, silent fact that you are, regardless of what thoughts, sensations, or identities pass through you. When you were a child, you lived in a smaller body, spoke different words, dreamed different dreams. Yet the witness of all those experiences, the silent I behind the eyes, is the same presence that listens now. The form has changed, the story has evolved, but being itself has remained untouched. And if this is true for the transitions within life, why should it not also be true for the transition we call death? We imagine death as a kind of falling into nothingness because we confuse the loss of form with the loss of being. We are attached to the body, to the mind's contents, to the narratives we tell about ourselves. When these fall away, it feels from the outside like a loss of everything. But from the inside, from the perspective of consciousness itself, it may be no different than the transitions we undergo every day, every night, every breath. A transformation, not an ending. Even when anesthesia renders the mind blank, even when coma erases the flow of thought, the return to awareness. After these states reminds us, the thread was never broken. The container shifted, the contents dissolved, but the silent witness endured. This argument from continuity is simple but profound. Being is not created at birth. It does not vanish at death. It flows, unseen, ungraspable, unstoppable, through all the changing forms of existence. We think of life as a book that begins with birth and ends with death, but perhaps it is more like a single breath within a much larger life. A breath in, a breath out, a movement within an endless ocean of being. And if we trust what our deepest experience shows us, we find that the fear of death is not rooted in the truth of consciousness, but in the illusions of the mind. The mind, shaped by time and space, cannot imagine what lies beyond them. But the self, the pure awareness at the core of what you are, is already beyond. It always has been, and it always will be. No philosophical journey is complete without facing the objections, the doubts that linger at the edges of reason. If consciousness is immortal, why does it seem so tied to the brain? Why does unconsciousness, during sleep or anesthesia, feel so much like a small death? And if memories fade, if identities dissolve, who or what continues after death? These are important questions. Questions that deserve careful, honest answers. First, the brain. It is true that damage to the brain affects consciousness. A blow to the head, a chemical imbalance, a disease, all these can alter perception, memory, even the sense of self. The materialist points to this and says, see, consciousness depends entirely on the brain. But correlation is not causation. A broken radio distorts the music it plays, but the music itself, the broadcast, exists independent of any single receiver. The brain perhaps is not the producer of consciousness, but its interpreter, its translator, its focusing lens. When the lens is damaged, the image is distorted. When the lens is shattered, the image disappears, but only for the observer using that lens. The light itself goes on, untouched. In the same way, when the body dies, the particular channel through which consciousness was expressed here closes. But the deeper field of awareness, the source itself, remains. Next, the experience of deep sleep or anesthesia. In those states, there seems to be no awareness, no memory, no perception, no continuity. Isn't that what death would be like? It is easy to think so, but notice carefully. When you emerge from sleep, you do not report having experienced nothingness. You simply resume, as if no time had passed. The gap is not filled with oblivion. It is filled with something beyond the grasp of waking memory. Consciousness does not always present itself with thoughts and perceptions. Sometimes it rests. Sometimes it suspends the contents of experience. But its ground, the raw fact of being, remains. Even in anesthesia, the unconscious state is not proof of annihilation. It is a suspension of certain functions, a stillness in the river, not the drying up of the river itself. And finally, the question of identity. If memories fade, if the personality dissolves, what is left? If I forget who I was, am I still me? This fear rests on a misunderstanding. We think we are our memories, our stories, our traits. But those are the clothing of the self, not the self itself. The true I, the silent witness behind all the passing experiences, does not depend on memory. It does not depend on language or thought. It is the open field in which memories and thoughts arise and fall. Even now, if all memories were taken from you, you would still be aware. You would still be present. You would still be. Identity at its root is not the sum of past experiences. It is the simple, direct fact of presence, of awareness, unchanging through all changes. And so the objections fall away, not through dismissal, but through deeper seeing. The brain mediates consciousness, but does not create it. Sleep and anesthesia suspend mental activity, but do not erase being. Memory and personality change, but the core witness remains untouched. Death changes the forms of experience, but it does not, and cannot, touch the one who experiences. The self that listens to these words, the self that feels the quiet pulse of being even now, is not a product of time. It is not a fragile flame that flickers and dies. It is a spark of the eternal. And it is already here and now, beyond the reach of death. As the argument deepens, a greater truth comes into view. One that changes not just how we see death, but how we see life itself. If consciousness is not produced by matter, if it is not located in space, if it is not extinguished by the death of the body, then we must ask a more radical question. What if consciousness is not in the universe at all? What if the universe is in consciousness? This idea is not a poetic metaphor. It is the logical implication of everything we have seen. If consciousness is the ground of all experience, and if experience is the only reality we ever directly encounter, then consciousness is more fundamental than the physical world. Matter appears within experience. Space and time appear within experience. Everything we know, every tree, every star, every moment of joy or sorrow, arises within the open, luminous field of awareness. Consciousness is not an accidental byproduct of a mindless universe. It is the canvas upon which the universe itself is painted. This view, sometimes called philosophical idealism, has been quietly affirmed by some of the greatest minds in history. Plato hinted at it. Leibniz reasoned toward it. Eastern philosophies declared it outright. The material world is not the ultimate reality. It is a manifestation, a movement, a song arising within the infinite silence of awareness. And if this is true, then death loses its terror. Because the destruction of a form within consciousness does not touch consciousness itself. Just as a wave rises and falls within the ocean without harming the ocean, so life and death rise and fall within being without harming being itself. You are not the wave alone. You are the ocean from which the wave arises. You are not the thought, not the body, not the fleeting identities that dance across the stage of time. You are the silent presence in which all of these appear and into which all of these dissolve. The death of the body is a change in the pattern of appearance, but not a rupture in reality. It is like the changing of a dream, the shifting of a scene in a vast, endless play. The stage changes, the actors change, but the witnessing awareness remains, timeless, boundless, untouched. To see this is to experience a profound liberation. Life no longer clings in desperation to its fleeting forms. Death no longer looms as a final darkness. The self is recognized not as a fragile thing trapped between birth and death, but as the very light in which birth and death themselves are seen. And so the journey comes full circle. What seemed at first like a distant hope, the immortality of consciousness, reveals itself as a simple fact. Not a wish, not a fantasy, but the quiet truth whispered by every moment of being. Consciousness is not in time. It is not in space. It is not a thing that can be lost. It is the reality from which all things arise, and to which all things return. It is the Alpha and the Omega, the first and last witness of all that ever was and ever will be. And it is who you are, even now, even here, even always. At the end of this journey, we stand before a truth both humbling and magnificent. You are not what you thought you were. You are not merely a body, a mind, a fleeting arrangement of cells and memories hurtling toward decay. You are something deeper. You are the witness of all these things, silent, spacious, unbroken. From the very first breath you took to the one you will someday release, something within you has remained constant. That which sees, that which knows, that which simply is, has not aged, has not faltered, has not changed in its essence. The deathless witness has been with you always, though hidden behind the masks of personality and the shifting sands of thought. It has watched joy and sorrow, triumph and defeat, without itself being diminished. It has been the silent partner to every experience, the invisible ground of every moment. And when the final moment comes, when the body falls away, when the story concludes, this witness will not be extinguished, because it was never born, because it belongs not to time, but to eternity. The mind shaped by fear imagines death as a fall into nothingness. But nothingness is not something consciousness can experience. You cannot be aware of your own absence. You cannot see your own blindness. You cannot witness your own erasure. Being is its own guarantee. It flows through every change, every loss, every ending, without being touched. Consciousness is not a candle flickering in the dark. It is the light in which darkness itself appears. It is the silent certainty behind all uncertainty, the stillness behind all movement, the life behind all forms of life. And it is yours. Not in the sense of possession, but in the sense of identity. You are not a thing that has consciousness. You are consciousness itself, appearing for a time as a person, a life, a name, but always, in truth, far vaster, far deeper, far more enduring than any story could ever tell. The death of the body, then, is not a plunge into oblivion. It is a letting go of appearances. It is a shedding of form. It is a return to what has always been present, but was overlooked in the rush of becoming. It is the homecoming of the soul to itself. And so, the ancient teachings were right. The philosophers were right. The mystics were right. Life does not end with death, because life, true life, was never confined to form to begin with. Your consciousness, silent, luminous, deathless, is already beyond the reach of time. You are not on your way to eternity. You are in it already, right now, right here, always.